All right. Good morning. For those of you who are just joining us, or if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm going to be doing live on stream our cultural literacy lesson for the week. I don't think anybody's listening right now, so you're all going to be watching this on YouTube. So I hope that you're all having a great day. I hope that you all had a great spring break. Here's our first lesson about we're going to talk through cultural literacy. So as always, in this cultural literacy, we're going to have two references, allusions. Those are going to be to Greek figures today. And then we are going to have two Greek and Latin roots, and then we're going to have a logical fallacy. So let's get started. So our first, we have Narcissus, who is our first illusion. And you know what? I'm seeing that my header here is is conflicting with boop. So let's just go ahead and not see that. Okay. So Narcissus, in Greek mythology, Narcissus was a hunter who was renowned for his beauty. He was the son of the nature god named Cephisus and a nymph named Liriope. He was exceptionally proud in that he disdained those that loved him. So Narcissus was the kind of guy that he didn't think anybody was good enough for him, and he had sort of a habit of making people feel bad because they loved him. Like he didn't think that they were good enough for him. So Nemesis was the goddess of revenge, and let me pause. Back up. He really broke some people's heart. There was this girl Echo who was in love with him, and she ends up killing herself, and it's this whole big story, and that's where echoes and caves come from. That's not important. Basically, Nemesis saw how he was sort of messing with the people that loved himself, that loved him, because he didn't think they were good enough for him. So Nemesis, who was the goddess of revenge, saw this and attracted Narcissus to a pool where he saw his own reflection in the water and fell in love with it, not realizing it was merely an image. So he sees himself, and because he loves himself so much, his punishment for being mean to people because of his self-love is that he's caught staring at this pool. So he left the beauty. He couldn't leave the beauty of his reflection, and he died. Now, depending on who you ask, he either drowned or he starved to death. Narcissus is the origin for the term narcissism, which is a real psychological diagnosis that involves a fixation with oneself. A narcissist is someone who is so internally oriented to themselves that it affects the way they deal with other people. So if we were to make an allusion to this in context, I would say that Mr. Lawrence is like Narcissus, but he really is as attractive as he thinks he is, right? So we're referencing to that sort of self-love element. Mr. Wright is like the pool that Narcissus stared into. Once you peer into his eyes, you can't look away. There, we're not referring to Narcissus so much as we're referring to the pool. Let me pause here for a second. Oh, you know what? I forgot to pause on the first slide, but you have plenty of time on it. So next we have Adonis. Poor Adonis. We had two beautiful Greek hunters today, our illusions. So Aphrodite fell in love with the beautiful youth Adonis. She sheltered Adonis as a newborn baby and entrusted him for Persephone, but Persephone was also taken by Adonis's beauty and refused to give him back to Aphrodite. So these two goddesses, Aphrodite and Persephone. Persephone is the goddess of springtime. Aphrodite is the goddess of love. They both fall in love with this kid, Adonis, right? They sort of adopt him as a baby and raise him, and then he grows up to be this very beautiful, attractive young man. And so Zeus settled this dispute, right? He said that Adonis would spend a third of the year with one of the goddesses, a third of the year with the other, and a third of the year with who he chose. Okay, so he chooses to spend 2/3 of the year with Aphrodite, probably because she's the goddess of beauty, and this upsets a lot of people. So Adonis was eventually killed by a wild boar, said to have been sent by Artemis, jealous of Adonis's hunting skill, or in retaliation for Aphrodite instigating the death of Hippolytus, a favorite hunter of the goddess, or by Aphrodite's paramour Ares, her boyfriend Ares, who was jealous of Aphrodite's love for Adonis, or by Apollo to punish Aphrodite for blinding his son Erymanthus. It doesn't matter which version you read. The whole thing to take away from this is that Adonis was basically killed because he was a pawn in the greater games of the gods. Everybody loved him, right? And Persephone loved him. Everybody thought he was beautiful, and he caused so much jealousy because he was so loved that he ended up dying sort of through no fault of his own, right? He died in Aphrodite's arms, who came to him when she heard his groans because he'd been stabbed by a boar. Adonis was this kind of figure who was a really good guy, but he was almost too pretty. He was too perfect for his own good, too beautiful for his own good. When we make a reference to this, now there is actually a modern usage of the word Adonis. When we say the word Adonis, we're usually talking about someone who is sort of a physical specimen, physically perfect, or we're talking about someone who is pursued by so many people that it gives them problems, right? I think Mr. Rights and Mr. Lawrence is modern versions of Adonis, right? If you say someone is a modern Adonis, you're saying that like they're a good person and they're in super good shape and they're good looking and they're fit and they're whatever, on and on and on, right? They're almost like this sort of perfect specimen of a human. Or we can talk about it as, having so many people be in love with you that it becomes an issue, right? There were so many boys vying for attention. She felt like Adonis. Either one of those works perfectly because they reference back to this idea that like Adonis with this kid was this person who was sort of like too perfect for his own good. Next, we have our Greek and Latin roots. First, we have for, which means in front of, previous, or earlier. Right, Mr. Wright says that students with foresight will complete their assignments on time. Foresight. Oh, you know what? I need to actually kill my webcam for this one. Boop. All right. Foresight is the ability to see things in front of, like before they happen, right? Previous when they are happening. The foreground of the oil painting was dominated by Mr. Lawrence's beautiful eyes. The foreground in the oil painting is the front of the oil painting. Duck or duct means lead, right? So students know Mr. Wright's class that if they do not allow him to conduct the lesson, they will not remain in the room for long. Conduct is to lead a room, right? The conductor of a train or the conductor of an orchestra leads the orchestra or the train, right? Mr. Lawrence is rumored to have powers of deduction that rival Sherlock Holmes himself. Deduction is to come up with something to lead yourself to the truth using the available evidence. So give a second to write these in. All right. Next up, we have genetic fallacy. This fallacy avoids the argument by shifting focus onto something or someone's origins. It's similar to an ad hominem fallacy in that it leverages existing negative perceptions to make someone's argument look bad, without actually presenting a case for why the argument itself lacks merit. So you committed this fallacy if you judge something as either good or bad on the basis of where it comes from or from whom it came. Now, this is similar to, but not necessarily racism. Racism can be an expression of the genetic fallacy. Like if we say, like, we can't trust anything that comes from China, right? We're saying, I don't trust that thing or that argument, right? I don't believe you because you are Chinese. That's where you are from China, right? That is a form of racism, but it's one of those like rectangle square things where it's like not every example of genetic fallacy is racism, but some are, right? Accused on the 6 o'clock news of corruption and taking bribes, the senator said that we should all be very wary of things we hear in the media because we all know how very unreliable the media can be, right? We didn't engage with that argument that he had been corrupt, right? Instead, he said we can't trust where it came from. We can't trust the media. Similarly, the politician said that the teachers union couldn't be trusted in their negotiations because everyone knows how lazy teachers are. Again, you can't trust what this person says because of where they come from or who they are. That is an ad hominem. Well, it is a form of an ad hominem, but it's specifically like where this message comes from is not reliable because of where it comes from. You have all probably experienced this thing if you've argued with your parents and you've had your parents say something like, "Well, yeah, that may sound right, but teenagers are stupid, and so something that's coming from a teenager probably is not going to be correct," right? That is a classic example of the genetic fallacy. It's where something came from. So it's not necessarily racist. It can be, though. All right, so that's been cultural literacy. Let me go ahead and